It's been a while, but they're back. Sabby's Deep Dive. We're going to do a deep dive into Chuck Schumer. Chuck Schumer pretends that he is this progressive politician. He pretends that he cares about progressive policies. But Chuck Schumer is not who a lot of people think he is. He even tries to, I guess, walk on both sides when it comes to Israel. But tonight, I'm going to show you the real Chuck Schumer. You see, when it comes to Israel, he tries to pretend like he's for a two-state solution. Like this speech he gave here on the Senate floor. Listen to this.
As I have said, there are also some Israelis who oppose even a two-state solution with a demilitarized Palestinian state because they fear that it might tolerate or be a harbor for further terrorism against the Jewish state. I understand these fears, but the bitter reality is that a single state controlled by Israel, which they advocate, guarantees certain war forever and further isolation of the Jewish community in the world to the extent that its future would be jeopardized.
Pause. That is Chuck Schumer there, basically making the case that he's against a single state for Israel. He's also against a single state for Palestinians. But that is actually a contradiction to what he said at AIPAC's convention. I told you guys, we're going to go through all of this tonight. Chuck Schumer is one person on the Senate floor. He's another person when he's in different, sectors in different communities. And he's also another person when he's at an AIPAC convention. And I think you're going to see that tonight. You're going to see these two different sides of Chuck Schumer when it comes to this particular issue.
Let me elaborate. They say the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. If Israel were to not only maintain the status quo, but to go beyond that and tighten its control over Gaza and the West Bank, as some in the current Netanyahu administration have suggested, in effect creating a de facto single state, then what reasonable expectation can we have that Hamas and their allies will lay down their arms? It would mean constant war. On top of that, Israel moving closer to a single state entirely under its control would further rupture its relationship with the rest of the world, including the United States. Support for Israel has declined worldwide in the last few months, and this trend will only get worse if the Israeli government continues to follow its current path.
So again, here he makes it seem like he's not in support of Israel having more control and more land. This is his public position. There's public Chuck, and then there's private Chuck, right? But private Chuck is starting to become a little bit more public as more people start to have more resentment for Israel.
I appreciate that so many Israelis cannot contemplate the possibility of two states right now because they remain so traumatized and so angry by what Hamas did on October 7th. The brutality, the viciousness, the sexual assault, the imprisonment and abuse of hundreds of hostages. I'm, of course, sympathetic to this point of view. I'm upset. I'm angry, too. We'll never forget what happened on October 7th. But even while we carry that anguish in our hearts, we have to think ahead to the future, the medium, the long term, how we can ensure that something like October 7th never happens again. We cannot let anger or trauma determine our actions or cloud our judgment. A two-state solution may feel daunting, especially now, but I believe it is the only realistic and sustainable solution on the basis of security, on the basis of prosperity, on the basis of fundamental human rights and dignity. But in order to achieve a two-state solution, the reality is that things must change.
Okay, so here he is peddling this two-state solution narrative, right? So you see what he kind of did there is like he talked about like atrocities on October 7th, but he doesn't mention any of the atrocities that the Palestinian people have had to go through. Doesn't mention any of that at all, right? So he says that they're not going to forget October 7th, but the Palestinians are supposed to forget everything that has happened for decades to their people, the occupation, the oppression, etc. Right? Then he tries to butter it up a little bit by saying we need a two-state solution. So let me show you something. Because when Chuck Schumer was recently on the CBS morning show with Gayle King, I want to show you what he's doing. He wrote this book. So now he's on this book tour, right? And he's like, let me promote my book about the dangers of anti-Semitism, et cetera. Like, so now he has been summoned to be the one to go around and try to increase support for Israel. That's really what this is really about, right? Let me show you something that he said on CBS this morning. Now you got Gayle here, Black woman. The gentleman next to her, I always forget his name, but I know he was a former professional athlete, Black man. And then, of course, you got Tony here, who also is a settler. You see what I'm saying? This is the same guy who interviewed Ta-Nehisi Coates and kind of gave Ta-Nehisi Coates pushbacks because of what Ta-Nehisi was talking about with the Palestinians after his trip. Listen to this.
All right. Finally, I'm aiming it at my left, my people on the left, my friends on the left. I've always been a progressive, but we've always seen anti-Semitism on the right. You saw those people at 9/11, at January 6th wearing shirts that more than 6 million. But now a lot of it's trickled over to the left, and that's bad too. And finally, I hope every student and every school makes this advisory or required reading. And you know who else should read it?
So now here's Chuck Schumer on his book tour telling people that this book that he wrote should be required reading. This is Chuck Schumer doing the bidding of Israel and also the bidding of Netanyahu. Even though he criticizes Netanyahu, he's still doing his bidding, which he'll expose himself a little bit later on when we get to that part. Now you got a Black woman there and a Black man sitting there. And Chuck Schumer is making it seem like he's the most oppressed person in the world in front of their faces. Now, they're not going to give any kind of pushback because they know what'll happen. They'll lose their job. They'll probably get smeared, etc. But how can you sit up there and say in front of two Black people to make it seem like you're the most oppressed person? Chuck Schumer went to Harvard, fam. You know that? Chuck Schumer went to Harvard. He not oppressed. Chuck been fine. Chuck has been fine. But he wants you to think, he going on this book tour across the country, he wants you to think that something has been stolen from him, that he has been beat down, that he has lost everything. Now listen, there is real anti-Semitism. And what's sad is that when people use that excuse for anything, like you criticize Israel, you did this, you said that, it makes it harder when there are actual situations and incidents that are anti-Semitic. It makes it harder for people to believe it because you can't throw that out there all the time. Imagine if Black people, imagine if I did that every day. Imagine if I did it every day. Oh, this happened because I'm Black. Oh, it happened because of slavery. What if I did that every day? It's used as a tool. And Chuck Schumer's a part of that. He sits there and he tells you that he's a progressive. What Chuck Schumer's trying to do is he's trying to make the progressive position pro-Israel. But the progressive position, if you look at the DSA handbook, if you look at the Justice Democrats, agenda that they had before any of these candidates won under Justice Democrats, they're pro-BDS. They reject what the state of Israel is doing. They reject people going to visit Israel. But because people have allowed that term progressive to become watered down, that's how someone like Chuck Schumer can say, look, I'm a progressive. That's how Richie Torres can say he's a progressive. That's how Jim Clyburn can say he's progressive. These people are not progressive. So they're trying to make pro-Israel a progressive position. Everyone pay attention to this. I've been trying to warn people about this for quite some time. They're trying to change the narrative.
Donald Trump.
I'm sure you're
He has shown, let me just say this. He'd do a lot to read it because Donald Trump, let me just finish this quick point. Donald Trump has shown that he regards Jews as transactional. Oh, they're good for votes, they're good for money. He has no understanding of the Jewish people, and it leads him to do bad things, sitting down with that anti-Semite Fuentes. When Charlottesville occurred, saying both sides are to blame. Cutting off funds to our synagogues that need protection from anti-Semitism.
Senator, this is an important question here. Yes. You're doing the one hand, so on the other hand, it's like Fiddler on the Roof here.
So do you see this? Right? So he's talking about the protection of the religious institutions and all of those things, right? Okay. Let me ask you a question, guys. When people burn down Black churches, and yes, that still happens today, by the way. I don't want you to think that's just something that was in history books. When people burn down Black churches, does the public and the US government come to say, we got to protect these churches? When Dylan Roof walked into that church in Charleston, South Carolina and killed 9 people, did the public and the US government say, we got to protect these Black churches? No. This is the danger I told you guys before, and please express this to your friends, especially those of you who are Black. Please start letting people know. Black people, we have to stop calling ourselves minorities. Minorities includes a whole bunch of other everything. Whole bunch of everything. And what happens is that we're not at the top of that minority category. We're at the bottom. Same thing with people of color. We're not at the top. We're at the bottom. We're the last ones on the totem pole. So in order for us to get any type of gains as Black Americans in this country or a part of the Black community, we have to stop referring to ourselves as minorities and people of color. And I didn't always believe this. It took a while for me for this to sink in. I got to tell you, I didn't buy it. I was like, oh, what's wrong with that term? Oh, but what's a big deal? But as I just do research and I see who's actually benefiting the most by having that term, it's not Black people. When we had the conversation on the show about DEI, what did I show you? The evidence shows. The evidence shows that the DEI hires were mainly white women. So these things don't benefit us when it's this all live matter group of color people. We're at the bottom. We're not at the top when it comes to beneficiaries. So people have to point these things out. Stop saying that we are minorities. People ask me, oh, well, you call yourself African American? I'm like, I'm Black. I always said, I never bought into this stuff. People always come up with all these different terms that I never bought into. At one point, people were like, now we got to call people Latinx. None of my Latino friends agreed with that. But people just created these terms and they put it out into the ethers and said, this is what you're going to be called now, right? When I was a kid, my parents said, we're Black, right? We're Black. But then all of a sudden there was this new term that came around called African American. And my dad told me, he said, none of us in this family have ever been to Africa. Like, it just, so it was like, we have to stop letting people in power tell us who we are. We have to stop just putting ourselves up under all these groups that just include everybody else. Because to Chuck Schumer's point, when he is advocating for his people, he's advocating for his people. There's no separate other this. When Chuck Schumer and these other politicians, when they rushed to pass legislation in Congress, they rushed to pass legislation for his people. There was no include all these other groups. A little bit more here.
And on the other hand, this is an important question, though, that a lot of people struggle with. Anti-Semitism, and then the line between anti-Semitism and criticism of Israel, its government, its actions.
Great question. To criticize Israel is not anti-Semitic. I've done it. I got a lot of flack when I criticized Netanyahu a while back. Yes. But when it goes over the line and you call someone an effing Zionist or effing Jew,
Now he's conflating Zionism with Judaism. See, this is the two sides of Chuck Schumer. This is what I was trying to show you. Zionism and Judaism are two different things. Judaism is a religion. Zionism is not. Zionism is a supremacy project. So you see the real Chuck Schumer coming out? It gets better as we go along. This is different from that whole we need a two-state solution thing you just saw, right? Notice that he said, there's nothing wrong with criticizing Israel. I criticize Netanyahu. Stop right there. It's easy to criticize Netanyahu, especially if you're a Democrat. Netanyahu's right wing. That's why it's easy for Chuck Schumer and Bernie and all of them to say Netanyahu has lost it. It's easy to do that. In fact, the Democratic Party expects you to criticize the right. But how often and when do you hear Chuck Schumer criticize the state of Israel? I'm not talking about the Likud party. I'm not talking about Netanyahu. Do you hear Chuck Schumer criticize Israel for the rampant racism? No, you don't, because that existed before Netanyahu was in power. It's like people who say things like, they say Donald Trump caused racism or something. They said Donald Trump is racist. Therefore, he created all the race problems, right? It's all because of Donald Trump, right? So it's easy to criticize Donald Trump, but racism existed in America before Donald Trump. So I sincerely hope that people can make those two connections there. Calling out Netanyahu's easy. Calling out the state of Israel and the rampant racism and the supremacy that exists is a totally different thing. And that is something that Chuck Schumer does not do. But he wants you to believe that he's progressive.
About the guy who went on the subway car and said, all Zionists get out of the subway car. How about the head of the Brooklyn Museum, Jewish, but nothing to do with Israel, whose house was scarred in red paint? And when people say, from the river to the sea, yes, that's the Hamas slogan. Hamas is genocidal. They want to get rid of all the Jews. You know, their charter says, that a Jew behind a tree? Shoot him. Yeah. When Hamas...
So none of them interrupt, right? But there was an old charter and there was a new charter. Chuck Schumer is purposefully saying things that he says came from, that's the older charter. He's doing that on purpose, just like he went on to The View recently and he's still telling that lie about the beheaded babies, even though CNN and other corporate media outlets had to correct themselves for that as well. Even Joe Biden had to correct that statement. So why is Chuck Schumer continuing to spread this lie? Nobody ever saw any beheaded babies. It was just said. But you see beheaded Palestinian babies over and over again on X and other social media platforms since after October 7th. You've seen just babies just falling apart, children's bodies falling apart and everything. But they want you to pretend that that's not real. But they want you to pretend that these beheaded babies that nobody saw on October 7th is real. Why isn't Chuck Schumer saying anything about the Palestinian babies that are falling apart that we see all the time? Let me show you why, okay? Because see, Chuck, he think he's slick. But in this recent interview that Chuck Schumer had, he exposes quite a bit about what his job is. And his job is not to fight for you and me or even the people in his district. His job, and he mentions it here, listen to this. I told you he went to Harvard. Harvard was also the place where Schumer first saw left-wing anti-Semitism in action, using the cloak of anti-Zionism as it often does today. So do you see what he's doing? Again, they're trying to, and this is why they were trying to rush to change that definition, because they're trying to say that being a Zionist or being anti-Zionist is also anti-Semitic. That's what they're trying to do. The majority of Zionists, by the way, are not Jewish. You have there's some crazy Christian evangelicals out there that are a big part of that Zionist movement. So he goes on to tell you what he was ordered to do. And let me just go down here. Okay. But he also warned that the greatest danger to Israel long term is if you lose half of America, the liberal half. Everybody hearing this? On one of Netanyahu's previous visits to the United States, Schumer told me he urged the prime minister to go on Rachel Maddow and not just Sean Hannity. Netanyahu ignored the advice, and Schumer, in a Senate speech, later called for new elections to replace him, for which he remains fiercely proud. It showed Democrats, he said, that it's possible to oppose Netanyahu while championing the Jewish state. My job, he told me, is to keep the left pro-Israel. My job, he told me, is to keep the left pro-Israel. And that's what Chuck is paid to do. That's why he's not talking about the dead Palestinians. That's why he's not talking about all the kids that have died in Gaza. That's why when it came to George Floyd, when it came to police brutality, he just put on kente cloth for black people, didn't offer you anything, just a piece of cloth. There was no legislation rush to protect you. That's why he's not looking out for his district. That's why he's not fighting for you. He is not assigned to do that. His job is to keep the left pro-Israel. And if you look at this and you see, when it comes to the money, you can see it yourself. Now, I didn't make this up. Chuck Schumer, over $1.7 million. Over $1.7 million from the AIPAC lobby. His job is to keep the left pro-Israel. He is not there to help you. And I'm so sick and tired of people trying to run cover for this man. I'm sick and tired of people saying to support him, the Working Families Party endorsed Chuck Schumer. How are you helping working families if you're there to advocate for Israel instead of people in this country, okay? How are you helping working families? How are you progressive if you're taking all this money from the Israeli lobby? You're not. These people are dangerous. They're a danger to society, and people have to see this. You have to see it for what it is. And I said this as well. He is there to serve Israel. He is saying it out in the open. How do people feel about these politicians prioritizing Israel? Everyone in Israel has health care, but not in America. I don't hear them calling it socialism in Israel. These parties have been playing us for years. People need to sit back and ask this question, folks. Open up your mind for a minute. I don't give a damn what side of the political aisle you're on. You need to ask yourself this question. Why is it that in Israel, they have free college, they have universal health care, the U.S. sends $3.8 billion to Israel every year, but when we bring up universal health care in this country, when we bring up free public college for everyone in this country, it's socialism. I don't hear anybody in Israel walking around talking about, oh no, don't give us that health care. It's socialism. Who do you think is helping this? Where do you think all the money's going? Why do you think you got all these homeless vets out on the street? Why do you think the housing crisis continues to be a problem? Why do you think that everything continues to get expensive in this country? Why do you think people are struggling to get by? It was made very clear that the priority was going to be Israel. My point in this is to tell you that Chuck Schumer is no different. Just because he has a D next to his name, that don't mean a damn. Now they can take US dollars and they can give it to Israel and make sure they got everything that they need. But you got people starving right here, boo. You got people that can't afford to pay for surgeries that they need right here. But in Israel, everybody got just what they need. You see, when I say the truth is out there, I want you to see this is the real Chuck Schumer. This is the Chuck Schumer at an AIPAC convention. I want you to hear the real Chuck Schumer. I want you to hear what he really feels.
The view of Palestinians is simple. Well, the Europeans treated the Jews badly, culminating in the Holocaust, and they gave them our land as compensation. Of course, we say it's our land. The Torah says it. But they don't believe in the Torah. So that's the reason there is not peace. They invent other reasons, but they do not believe in a Jewish state. And that is why we in America must stand strong with Israel through thick and thin. We must, because that is the reason, not any of these other false shibboleths, why there is not peace in the Middle East. Too many people don't understand that here in America.
So do you see the difference between the rhetoric that he said on the Senate floor and the rhetoric that he said at this AIPAC convention? At the AIPAC convention, he tells you that it's his land. He tells you it's his land. And he says it's his land because the Torah says so. Well, there's a lot of books that say a lot of damn things, okay? There's a lot of books that say a lot of damn things. And even for the Christian Zionists who point back and they say, well, the Bible says, I don't remember reading any part in the Bible as someone who grew up in the church that said these European settlers have the right to this land. They're not indigenous to the land. They changed their name when they moved there to make it sound like they're indigenous. They're not. That's the real Chuck Schumer. This is the person people want you to get in line and just support. This is the person who refuses to step down from the Democratic Party, to step down from the Senate, even though he's called to do so. He's not willing to step down because he told you his job is to make sure that the left is pro-Israel. Now I'm supposed to sit here and believe that Chuck Schumer's oppressed? Get the fuck out of here, man. Chuck Schumer went to Harvard. Chuck Schumer's doing very, very well. But when we were protesting in the street over police brutality, Chuck Schumer wanted you to see this. His response was, let me put on a kente cloth and show the black people that I'm okay with them. I understand your pain, black people. Let me put on a kente cloth scarf. That's what we get. When our communities are broken, when they're poisoned through environmental poison, when they're attacked, the response is symbolism. There's no legislation that is rushed through Congress to try to help or save us or protect us. And Chuck Schumer, his response is, let's put on some kente cloth and let's just make black people feel a little bit better through some symbolism. But I didn't see Chuck Schumer going around saying, let's help black people from the police. I didn't see none of that. I don't see Chuck Schumer saying, let's protect these black churches. I don't see Chuck Schumer saying, let's keep the drugs, let's keep all of the poison out of black communities. I don't hear Chuck Schumer talking about Cancer Alley, boo. I don't hear any of these things. And people continue to vote for these people just because, oh, they got a D next to their name, just vote for that person. Do you not understand these people are a cancer to the black community? They're not helping us. Standing there with the cloth on looking goofy as hell. They are not helping us and they're not trying to help us. And then we get to this. And this is how I'm going to wrap up this deep dive. Now everybody's going on and they're talking about this interview that Bernie Sanders had where he got up and walked out because the interviewer came to him and said, what do you think about AOC, running for the Senate? I want to tell you what this response is really about, because I don't think people are seeing this the way that I saw it. Watch this. When I talk about protection, this is what I'm talking about.
Back when I first came to the Congress and the House, I helped form the Progressive Caucus. We had 5 people in it at that time. Now they got close to 100. So you got a whole lot of good people. Alexandria is extraordinary. I am so impressed by her work in Congress and she inspires young people all over the country.
Would you like to see her join in the Senate?
Right now we have, as I said, just a whole lot of people in the Congress. Okay, Jonathan, thanks.
Wait, I got one more. This is important.
Well, I asked you.
Okay.
You want to do nonsense, do nonsense.
No.
I don't want to talk about inside the Beltway stuff. I got 32,000 people.
I was just asking you about AOC because she was out there with you.
Fine, but I don't want to talk about this. What was the last question?
I was just going to ask you one more question about you. I mean, that's all. I was literally your last.
What is your question?
Well, I mean, it's easier.
So let me tell you how I see this with this Chuck Schumer discussion. Bernie Sanders doesn't want to answer that question about whether or not AOC should run for Chuck Schumer's seat, right? Because that's been in the news for like days. He doesn't want to answer that question. You know why? Because here's where Bernie and Chuck do agree, right? They agree with protecting Israel. Bernie Sanders agrees that, the violence has to stop. We need a permanent ceasefire. Or excuse me, he's not for a permanent ceasefire. He agreed that there should be a temporary ceasefire and that you need to get the humanitarian aid in. Bernie Sanders also pushed for let's stop giving weapons to Israel. But make no mistake, people got to remember that Bernie also lived in a kibbutz. He lived in a settlement. People have to also know that Bernie refused to call what was happening to Gaza genocide. Till this day, he still won't call it that. So what people have to understand is Bernie Sanders was protecting Chuck Schumer, because Chuck Schumer and AOC do have a difference when it comes to Israel. Now, I don't agree with AOC doing that webinar, conflating anti-Semitism with anti-Zionism. I heavily was against that, and the DSA called that out, and they were heavily also against that. But AOC supports BDS. Bernie Sanders does not, and neither does Chuck Schumer. Bernie Sanders, like Chuck Schumer, will call Netanyahu racist and extreme right wing. But Bernie Sanders won't call Israel out for what it is, a racist, supremacist state, just like Chuck Schumer. So he don't want to talk about the possibility of someone who supports BDS to come in there and replace Chuck Schumer, because Bernie Sanders wants to protect Chuck Schumer. He's only willing to go so far on Israel. Yes, he's better on Israel with some of these things instead of Chuck, but he's still going to protect Chuck. And for all the people who are saying that, well, he's got another movement going, yada, yada, yada. I'm trying to tell you guys, I do not want you to get your hopes up just to be let down again, because the reality is this: in the end, Israel is going to win, even when it comes to Bernie Sanders. Bernie is not going to go against the state of Israel. He may go against Netanyahu, but he's not going to go against the actual state of Israel. And neither is Chuck Schumer. People are being played. The truth is out there. I showed you what Chuck Schumer really believes when you watch that video of him at the AIPAC convention. That's the real Chuck. He said it's his land. So there you go. And now you know what his real role is. His role is to make sure that the left is pro-Israel. His goal was not to make sure that you have a respectable wage, that you're able to take care of your fam, your friends, that you can put groceries on the table. That's not his role. His role is to protect Israel and to make sure that the left is pro-Israel. And now you know, pass it on. Hey guys, this was a Sabby clip. If you like what you saw, hit that like button and subscribe.